Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. Of course, we are here with another amazing guest for you guys, and she's going to rock you guys' world. Before we get started, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head over to that YouTube channel, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And just have to let you know that this is for educational purposes only. Now, this woman that we have today, she is amazing and crazy intelligent, and she does really, really good work. So you guys, I'm not going to give too much away. I'm going to introduce my next guest. Debbie, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Tony. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Tell people where you're from.
I am in Virginia, in Northern Virginia area, outside of DC.
Okay. See, we talked about this before. See, I'm originally from Virginia as well, so, and I met so many people from the DC area, and I'm like, where have you guys been my whole entire since I've been here, right? It is crazy. What's the weather like down there right now?
Well, it's funny because, last night they were forecasting this, big for us, snowstorm of like 7 inches. And, I woke up in the middle of the night, I saw snow was coming down. So I thought I'd wake up and it would be all white. It's like not even an inch, which that happens in this area. It's as you know, you grew up here. It's just totally unpredictable. We could have 3 feet or we could have no snow for years.
Yeah. And it's that crazy snow too. That's that wet snow, right? You know what I'm saying? It's thick all over the doggone place and it just sticks to you. And that humidity just smacks you around and you walk out looking like you got in a fight with a cat.
Exactly. And the snow is so heavy. So like the last storm we had, when you shovel it, it's so wet. It's so heavy. We don't really get that light, fluffy snow that you probably have where you are.
You know what? It just snowed last night, and it's crazy because although it was light and and fluffy and everything, the water underneath had froze. So people, everyone who migrates to Colorado, they don't know how to drive in the snow because most of them from California or Texas or something like that, and totally understandable. They're coming from hotter states and they get the snow up here and they're just like, oh yeah, don't worry. And I've watched a lot of cars just go off on the side of the road and all kinds of things. And I was just like, yeah, I guess you just learned a valuable lesson about that right now.
Yeah.
So tell people what you do.
Yeah. So I am I'm a life coach that works with parents who have a child with mental illness and or addiction. And I help them with many of the challenges that they're going through. As parents, it can be just life-changing when we have a child that suddenly maybe we thought, everything was just normal. Their childhood seemed normal. They were, growing up with friends, sports and whatnot. And all of a sudden something happens. Maybe the first thing that they show is being suicidal. Maybe it's difficulties in school or difficulties with friends or self-harm behaviors. It could be any number of things, but it can really be life-changing for the whole family and really hard as parents to navigate, especially when things become more serious and there's hospitalizations and maybe suicide attempts or even drug use also, and many become addicted to substances, different drugs, alcohol, to self-soothe, to calm, to help with what they're experiencing inside of themselves. And this just makes it really difficult for parents. And I know myself, I was one of them, and just kind of living in fear and having those sleepless nights and just being all consumed with how their child is doing, how things are going, what they're doing, what's happening, and just really getting on that roller coaster with them. And their life becomes not really their own. It becomes, just overwhelmed, filled with worry, filled with hopelessness. And I work with them. I help them to be able to have a more peaceful life, to be able to find that calm, that peace, that steady, that that inner strength that they have within them, to be able to take care of themselves and navigate these challenges and not have to get on that roller coaster with their child, and to really have more peace and more joy and more hope in their lives, and even a lot of times that does lead to a better relationship with their child as well, because they're coming from a different space, they're coming from a calmer place, they're coming from a more fulfilled place where they've filled themselves up, they've met their own needs, and they're in a better place to be able to deal with these challenges that are happening. And so I really help them. I meet them where they are, and people come to me in different places. Some people are even estranged from their adult child and haven't spoken in a while, and others are, trying to figure out the living situation, the living arrangements of what's going to work best for their adult child who may be addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know how to set boundaries, or set boundaries with love, and still be able to have a close relationship with their child. And so just depending where they are, I feel the one-on-one coaching usually works well, because everybody is going through something unique. Everybody's family situation is different, and everybody's there's not a one size fits all, there's not like a one answer that's going to solve everybody's problem at the same time. And so I really find meeting them where they are, and going from there, and figuring out what they want most, what's most important, and what we can work on together. And I really become a part of their team, and really invested in their growth, and in them finding more peace and hope in their lives.
Wow. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for the work that you do, because I know of some families out there that are struggling with kids, that are struggling with mental health issues, addiction, and things like that. And I've seen the way that it tears through the family, right? They want so bad to support that child, or that individual, and sometimes they just don't know where to turn to.
Yeah.
So thank you for the amazing work that you do. Thank you for stepping in and helping those parents find those solutions and build that relationship with their children, because I think it's really, really important. Now, you have a journey, you have a story that gives you that experience in that field, that makes you the expert when it comes down to this. Let's talk about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what got me started with this work. That's why I want to help others. Is this is my journey. This is my story. When my oldest son, at the age of 17, came to me one night, and I want to say, before this night that really changed things for us, everything had seemed pretty normal for me. He had a pretty normal childhood. He was an easygoing kid, really friendly, lots of friends, loved sports, loved religion, did pretty well in school, a great big brother to his siblings. And, nothing would have really prepared me for what happened. And it was the day after Thanksgiving holiday in the US. And so this was before he was 18 years old. He was about a little over 17. And he came to me one night. I was in my bedroom, and he told me that he wanted to kill himself. And he talked about his plan and how he wanted to do it. And he went into great detail. And he even admitted that he had attempted it before. And it was clear that he was trusting me to be there and to listen and to help him. every part of me wanted to scream out, but I was like screaming inside, but on the outside I knew he needed me to hear him, and I knew he needed me to be there for him and to listen and to guide him. And so I listened, and I was patient, and I didn't scream out, I didn't overreact, and I just listened. And together we were able to reach out to the family doctor, and she was able to speak with somebody in a mental hospital that treated adolescents, because he wasn't an adult yet, so he wasn't able to go into the regular psychiatric unit. So she had somebody call over, speak with me, speak with him. And I remember closing the door to my bedroom and leaving him to have this conversation with the person on the other phone, and going downstairs and sitting there, and just, it felt like the longest, 20 or however long minutes it was, just wondering, like, what's happening, like, all these thoughts going through my mind, like, how did this happen, like, when did this start, like, what caused this, why is this happening. And it was the beginning of a 3.5 month hospital stay for him, which was challenging in and of itself, just to, he had never been hospitalized before for anything. None of my children had. And 3.5 weeks is certainly a long time. And thankfully they had it set up, probably because it was for adolescents. They had meetings set up, so a few times a week I would get to meet with his psychiatrist, his social worker, him. And so they would tell me about what was happening, what they were thinking, how he was doing. And that was really a godsend to be informed in that manner. But it was still tough. I remember they had visiting hours, I think 6 days a week, every day except for Monday, and for 1 hour. And everybody would wait in the lobby until it was time, until they'd call us and say, okay, it's time. And then you'd have to get in a line, and they'd search all your belongings, because there was a lot of things you weren't allowed to bring up to the unit. Anything sharp, no phones or anything, or cameras, no cords or ropes, nothing that patients could use to harm themselves. And
Right.
I remember sitting in the in the waiting room, just in tears, because I was that parent with the first time experience with a child in the hospital. And it's so hard, because you don't know what's going to happen. And it's that uncertainty. And this is a big thing that I've learned during my journey. It's that uncertainty that really causes that pain for us, and that fear for us, and that worry and anxiety. And I certainly had that. And it was hard, because there were times that I visited him where he was happy to see me, and he was loving, the same loving person that I knew. There were other times when I went to visit it where he'd lash out in anger and say, why did you put me here? Get me out of here. I hate you, just awful, like this terrible, which at that point, I was so early in my journey that I didn't understand that it wasn't about me, that he was just angry at his predicament, and his illness, and how he felt inside. And I was a safe person, and I didn't understand that. And I took it personally, and I could tell you it was so hard. I would leave there in tears. And then there were other times where it was kind of in between, but he would talk and talk about things such as, the paranoia, being afraid that, that people were spying on him, and that the hospital slippers had a camera in them, and he couldn't wear them anymore because people are spying, and he has to close all the shades in the windows because he doesn't want anyone to spy. And, just all these symptoms that I didn't know were going on inside of him, he would tell me. And it was really hard to hear as a parent how tormented he was inside, and it just was really heartbreaking. So, every time I visited, I never knew what kind of mindset he would be in. And as a parent, I just had to take it all in. And I wish that I could have known things that I know now, like going back, but it was all part of my journey. And, this wasn't the only hospitalization. I wish I could say that, but there were many, many, many more over the years, so many. And such that I remember in future ones, seeing those parents probably having their children there the first time in the hospital in tears in the waiting room, just like I was that very first time. And I just remember feeling so much for them because I was there. And it also became a battle moving forward after that hospitalization of just finding him the right treatment, the right counselor, therapist to work with him that had experience. He was diagnosed with something called schizoaffective disorder, which at the time I never heard of. And I I didn't know what to expect really. And I educated myself and read a lot about it and learned a lot about it and asked questions at our meeting. And I was looking for, a psychiatrist for him and a therapist for him that had experience treating others specifically with schizoaffective disorder, because I wanted, my mindset was like, okay, I am going to get the best care for my son so that he can live as best of a life that he can. And so I was on a mission to do that. And it involved a lot of steps, and which weren't always easy. And I was up against battles with his father, who was my ex-husband. I was up against later battles with him, who didn't always want to go see a therapist, who didn't always want to take medication, and it was also a challenge. The doctor tried so many different medications. She let us know that it's a process, and there would be much trial and error, and many medicines made him worse. Many medicines gave him horrible side effects, and he didn't want to take them, and rightly so, understandably so. And so it was really a journey. And I did feel like my life was completely consumed. And I had two other children. He was my oldest. His name is Alex, and Alex is the oldest. And I had two other children. He was 17. My others were 15 and 14. And I also worked full time. And so, any time that I had was consumed with his illness and what later became addiction. I remember in the hospital, they did talk. They said he had been using marijuana, which at that point, I was just totally unfamiliar with the whole drug world. And I remember panicking when hearing that. And it got a lot worse, unfortunately. His drug use really escalated, and he probably tried almost every drug out there, and ended up with a really bad heroin addiction, which he was later on Suboxone basically for the rest of his life to help him with that addiction, to help him to not use heroin. But he used many, many other drugs, so it wasn't really our answer to everything. And I know he was just trying to escape how difficult and painful his life was, and how much his mental illness really plagued him. And I know, the addiction was really hard, and he was in and out of rehab centers for drug and alcohol addiction. And whenever he would go in there, he would be like your model patient there, and get really into it and excited about it. And I would start to get really hopeful. And he would come out, and I remember the first few times he would come out, he would come back home, and life would just return to the way it was. He would start using again. I remember one time I thought he had been sober, and I was walking out of I lived in a townhouse at the time, the end unit. I was walking out my steps to get into my car. And as I looked up, I saw him laying face first on the hill on the side of our house, with a backpack on his back and just his face in the ground. And I jumped out of my car and ran to him. And I moved him so that I could see his face, and he had a big gash in his head, probably from where he fell and hit a rock. And, he was unconscious. I called the ambulance, and not only did the ambulance come, but police came as well. And I had to beg for them not to arrest him because they checked his backpack and found alcohol, and the drinking age in our state was 21 at the time. So he was probably 19. And so luckily that time they didn't arrest him, but you know, it was just so hard. And it was like if I got on that roller coaster with him, it would just be, okay, he's in treatment, he's hopeful, he's doing well, yes, we're up here. And then a week later, no, we're down here, he's back to using. And it was so hard before I learned not to get on that roller coaster with him. And it it got to be the point where after several different treatment centers and him coming back home, his counselor finally said to me, for his age and putting him back in the same environment with, me as mom, as kind of the caregiver, even though he's, over 18, it lends itself more to him relapsing. And they really recommended he go into an Oxford house. And an Oxford house, for people who don't know, it's basically a sober living home where they'll have men's home and women's home. And, they have a group of men or women living there whose mission is to stay sober and to support each other to stay sober. And, they go to meetings together. They're required to get a job and that kind of thing. And so I said okay to this, and I remember he begged and pleaded to just come back home. And it was the hardest thing, that he did not want to go to an Oxford house. Before he got out of that treatment center, he kept saying, I just want to come home and sleep in my bed. And that was so hard for me to stick to the plan and say, no, this is what you need to do in order to get better, because that's what I believed he needed to do, because that's what I was told. And so, there was so many different challenges. And when he got into his 20s, there were times where I think the drugs and alcohol got so bad, and he'd go on and off his medications. And so, sometimes he'd call me and he'd be really paranoid, or he'd talk about hallucinations, or talk about being suicidal again. And I'd immediately know which medicine he was off of. And I would suggest, can you go and get a refill? And he'd say, yeah. And usually it was just he ran out and he just didn't get a refill. And there were times where there was a number of times that we almost lost him to a drug overdose. And a couple of them were actually where he had come back home after living outside the home for a few years. He came home temporarily between finding a place to live. He was home for about 6 months. And in that 6 months, I almost lost him a few times to overdoses. And I remember, they had to use Narcan to bring him back from the overdose. And there were times where they were not sure if he was going to make it. And it was really hard. There were phone calls in the middle of the night, telling me that he was brought into the ICU, and, that they weren't sure if he was going to make it. And it was really, really tough. And when we got into probably his later teen years, or mid-teen years, I could see him taking more of an interest in getting help for himself. He would put himself into the hospital, and he would put himself into the treatment centers, and he would really I could see he was really trying, and he really wanted to get help, but I think it was still really, really tough for him. And, on this journey, I had to get help for my own self, because I realized after a few years of just living in this stress and worry and fear and not sleeping, and I realized I was not living my own life. I realized my whole life revolved around his ups and downs and how he was doing from day to day, from moment to moment. That determined my happiness. That determined if I could function in my day. That determined if I could get any sleep. And even in the moments that he was doing well, I found I couldn't even enjoy the calm with him. And I knew that there had to be a better way to handle this. And I'd always been kind of interested in growth and in learning and that kind of thing. And I had been going to Al-Anon for a number of years already. And so I knew some of the principles that would help me. And I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins. So a lot of the things that I learned from him was definitely extremely helpful for me on my journey. And one thing I learned in particular is the role of needing certainty played in my whole outlook and my whole um, you know mental health as well. And I realized that I was just clinging to certainty. Like, my top need was certainty, and certainty in that I had to know that my son was going to be okay, and that life was going to unfold the way I wanted it to, on my terms. And you know when it comes to other people, we just can't have that certainty. Whether your child has mental illness and addiction or not, we don't have that certainty about other people. And it just got to be that this was just the center of my life, is that certainty. And so what I learned is that a couple of things about it. Well, first, it was eye-opening that this was like behind it, but I also learned that I could substitute, instead of having my highest need be certainty, a growth or contribution or something else I could make as a higher need. And for me, what really helped me so much was that contribution. And when I looked back on my life, I could see that I was always interested in doing things to help other people. I mean, especially, I think it probably a lot I did in Al-Anon was to volunteer and to be a group leader and to be a sponsor and to help out at events and conferences, and to really help others in Al-Anon. And so I could see how that helped me as well. And it was at that time that I also, when I was kind of realizing how much it helped to help others, I went through to start becoming a certified life and relationship coach. At that point, I wasn't working with parents, but I became a coach, and I was working with mostly women in relationships and helping them also with their relationship with themselves. And that was really helpful for me to really kind of focus on, like, the needs, like my needs for contribution and my needs for growth were just really, that helped to really kind of put certainty in its place. And I learned I could also kind of give myself certainty in other ways, just by regular routines and things like that. And so that was helpful. And also, really strengthened my spiritual connection with God, with the angels, and just I really prayed a lot, and I really stayed closer to God and closer to the angels, and really tried to focus on having faith over fear, and really focusing on being present for my son and being able to enjoy the moments with him and the moments with my other two kids. And that really helped for the remaining years that I was dealing with his illness and addiction. And I didn't have to get on that up and down with him. And it didn't mean crises didn't happen, but I was able to handle them better. And we had such a close, loving relationship, and I'm so grateful for that. And in the I guess when he got to be about 25, 26 years old, he was in and out of some of the it was over the pandemic, and he was in and out of the treatment in the hospital. and he really found a counselor he liked. He was in an outpatient program, and it was virtual because it was over the pandemic. So I think he attended every day, and he had a wonderful counselor. And I remember he was really trying, and there were times where there were definite periods of sobriety, definite periods where he was doing well. And what I remember is the last time we had together, which was January 1st of 2022. He was 26 years old, and he and my other two children and their partners came over to visit me where I was living out in the country. And it was the first time we remember seeing him looking happier and actually being completely sober. And it was a really, really wonderful experience. And I remember, saying, when they left, everybody giving hugs and exchanging I love yous goodbye, and not knowing that that was going to be the last time that we ever saw him. And it was a winter time, and we ended up getting a big snowstorm where there was no heat and power where I was, and he was trying to look at new rooms to rent. He was temporarily staying where he near where he was living at a hotel that I was paying for while he thought he needed a few extra days to find a new place, a new room. And he walked everywhere because he didn't drive, because he had a really bad seizure disorder and had seizures all the time. And he had type 1 diabetes. So he really just walked and didn't drive. And so he wanted to stay close to where he had been living so he could walk everywhere. And I was paying for that. And I remember he called me on the phone the Tuesday night. He was so excited that he found a place. He loved it. He said he could move in once the snow melted and he could move his stuff, and sounded really hopeful. And then the next day was Wednesday, and I didn't hear from him. And usually he would call or text each day, and I would transfer him money to pay for the next night at the hotel. And I didn't realize until a little later into the day that I hadn't heard from him. And I called my daughter and my other son, and nobody could reach him. We kept calling and texting, and no one could reach him. We called the hospital, we called the hotel, my daughter called the jail, and we just came up empty. And we just kept trying. And I was sick at the time. I had come down with COVID and still had no heat. And so I wasn't always thinking the clearest either, but I was really worried about him. And it was the next morning that I received a telephone call that really just changed my life forever. And it was about 9 a.m. and the phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local number, so I answered. And it was a police officer, and he said, "I'm so sorry to do this over the phone, but with the snowstorm and everything and you living so far out, I couldn't make it out there. And your son Alex was found dead." And that was just really the hardest thing to hear as a parent. And I remember getting my parents on the phone with me, which I'm so glad I did, because they could absorb more of what he was saying than I could. And then after we hung up the phone, I called my kids and told them, and they had all been so close, my three kids and I, because their father really wasn't in the picture. So it was the four of us, and it was really hard. And things after that, as you can imagine, were challenging
Yeah,
for quite some time.
I can I can definitely imagine. Um, more than imagine it. I've been in that space, and I could tell you it's the worst feeling in the world. There's nothing else that compares to that. So I
Yeah.
appreciate your strength in going through that. Now, explain what his disorder was. Explain that, the schizoaffective disorder, so people have a
Yeah,
better understanding of the mental health challenges that come along with that.
absolutely. So, schizoaffective disorder is kind of a cross between aspects of schizophrenia and aspects of bipolar disorder. So they can pretty much have any of the things that go along with either. My son specifically, he had the hallucinations, both auditory and visual, and the paranoia associated with schizophrenia. He also had the highs and lows, the manic episodes and the depressive episodes that are commonly seen with bipolar disorder. And he suffered more from the depression side of things than the mania. And he
Hmm.
definitely battled with times where he'd go into a psychotic state, which you could go into with either one, schizophrenia or bipolar. So it's 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 really difficult. And I hadn't heard too much about it back then, but now I am finding, as I work with parents, that there are many people out there whose child has been diagnosed with that.
Now, when you say many, what are the statistics? Because I want people to get a grasp of how many families are affected by this and not even know. They just see the symptoms, right? They see the child, or and see their actions and things like that. So what are the statistics of the children that are or yeah of the children that are affected with this disorder?
So I don't know specific statistics for schizoaffective disorder. I just see that it's rising now. It's becoming a more common diagnosis. But I do know that as many as 1 in 4 are impacted by a more serious mental illness. Like, and it's on the rise, unfortunately. And it's also starting earlier. It's starting at a younger age. I mean, we're talking about even middle school age now. And the statistics are not as high
Mm.
as 25% at that age, but we do see that it's starting younger and younger now, and it's really sad.
Now, as a parent who has had to um, go through that journey with your son, how was you coping, with your emotions? Because you still have three other kids that you're trying to raise as well. So,
Yeah.
how did it affect you emotionally? And also, how did it help you navigate with your other children during this course? Because they're also going through that with you, just from a different perspective.
Yeah, they are. They were going through it from a different perspective because, like I said, our family was so close. So, they were worried about Alex too. And, I learned as a mom, I'm a model for them, whether I'm aware of it or not, we are a model for our children. And so really, when I was able to start to be able to cope better and take care of myself better and set loving boundaries for myself, my children were better able to cope. Like, um, you know, I for emotions though, I mean, we are going to feel all these emotions. Like, that is normal. and
Hmm.
and and we, the thing is we have a choice of whether to stay in our emotions. We can feel them. We don't want to, the only way to move through them is to feel them. And that's the one thing I learned. We don't want to push them down. We don't want to bury them. We don't want to pretend that they don't exist. We actually want to give them love and make friends with them. But on the same token, they don't have to stay there. We don't have to stay in them. We can choose other emotions. We can choose to focus on things. We can choose to focus on having faith in a higher power, in God. We can choose to um, be present and enjoy the things that are positive, like, because there are positive things in life. I mean, I was blessed to be so close, such a loving relationship with Alex and my other two children, all of us. And I could focus on those things. And Tony Robbins says we feel what we focus on. So if we're focusing, if things are pretty steady, maybe they're not going the way you want it to be, but like you're focusing on when is the next crisis going to happen, and trying to like live in that, you're actually living in that crisis. You're feeling it now, and it doesn't help you to go through it now. It just prolongs your pain and suffering. We can't stop having pain, but we can prevent some of the suffering, and the suffering has a lot to do with our thoughts and how we're thinking. And so I learned all of this to try to work with what I had. And of course, when something would happen and he'd end up in the hospital, or an overdose or something, of course I had such difficult emotions. And in those crises, it was really tough. You're not gonna be pulling these happy emotions into you right then. But because I was stronger and I was taking care of myself on a
Right.
regular basis, I was able to deal with these better. And my kids, like I said, they just kind of modeled these things, and they would come to me, like even in their early 20s and stuff, and they wanted to support him and be there for him. But they also, sometimes it was really hard on them too. And especially I remember my daughter saying that when she would help him out and give him rides and stuff, he would start talking about all these drugs he was using and these terrible experiences he was having. And she said it was very difficult for her. And so we kind of talked about what she can do and how she can support him and how she can set loving boundaries and still be there for him and still be close with him, but be able to take care of her own needs as well. So my kids just sort of learned from me, and from observing, like how to also take care of themselves while helping to take care of him too.
Wow. That is truly powerful. Truly, truly powerful. Now, with the work that you do, working with these parents, what are some of the things that you come across, far as similarities that help you navigate being in that space with them?
Yeah, so I have I remember one woman that I really helped a lot with boundaries, and it reminded me of kind of my children, of how they wanted to be there and spend time with Alex, but sometimes things were really hard for them. And so a woman had I was working with, basically her relationship with her daughter had completely broken down. Her daughter was actively using drugs and homeless, and um, she she wasn't seeing her daughter because it was too difficult for her, and she had gotten to the point where she couldn't even answer the daughter's phone calls. And we talked about why that was, and it was because she didn't trust herself. Her daughter was always asking for money, and she'd use that money to go out and buy more drugs. And it's not that she didn't want to give her daughter any money. She wanted her daughter to be able to eat, but not buy more drugs. She wanted to see her daughter, but her daughter would wear her down and demand to come and live in the house, which she couldn't deal with all of the drug use. And so she just couldn't see or talk to her daughter. So we worked on setting boundaries with love, being able to trust herself, being able to come up with plans to handle these different situations. And it completely turned everything around. Like, she started taking her daughter's calls. She started bringing like picnic lunches to her daughter. They'd meet in the park in a neutral place, and she'd bring food and bring lunches. And
Mhm.
we talked about giving her daughter like grocery gift cards and things like that. And it really turned things around. That's just one example. I've also had parents that are just really struggling with dealing with their child lashing out so much, their child taking anger out on the parents, and they're taking it personally. And in turn, they're getting angry because of all the anger directed at them, and the relationship is just completely breaking down. And so I've been able to work with them to give them a better understanding of what their child is dealing with inside, and that what's coming out is not about them. It's about their own inner turmoil, and they're taking it out on them because they're the safe people as the parents. And to make them understand that their child might not be thinking or acting or talking rationally because their illness, the medications they're on, any drug use that they're on, any kind of psychotic state that they're in, these all impact it. And this is their illness talking. This is not their soul. This is not who their child is inside. And to see their illness as separate, and to be able to get that compassion back for their child. And so to be able to, have that foundation to begin to have a closer, more loving relationship with them. And so I've worked with them on that. And there's just so many different things. And the living in fear, so many parents have said that they've told me that they're not able to enjoy the calmer moments, the peaceful moments when things are doing well, when their child is, more steady. They can't even enjoy that. They may be sitting with their child, and they're thinking of something else. They're thinking of when is the next thing going to happen. And that's
Mm.
not, you can't really build a really strong, um, close relationship when you're not present. So those are just some of the things that I help them with.
Wow, man. Wow. And again, if I haven't said it before, I'm gonna say it again. Thank you for the work that you do. How and because listen to your story, and understanding where your story led you, we understand the importance of being in that moment with them, setting healthy boundaries, and, showing up in a different way of saying, no, I'm not going to contribute to your addiction or, the situation that you're in, but I'm going to provide for you to make sure that you have the things that you need for as food, clothing, shelter, but I'm just not going to give you the money because I know what you're going to do.
Hmm.
And I think that is really really important for people to understand, because you never know who's listening and who's going through a similar situation, like yourself and many other parents that are out there, struggling. Because as parents, we want to protect our children, right? We want to make sure that they're okay. And I think it's um, when we have children that are struggling with addiction and mental health issues, um, it's kind of hard not to take it personal, right? Because we have that bond with them, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, no, you don't understand. I gave birth to you, like, no,
Right.
I've loved you your whole entire life. So it's really hard to take that personal, right? Because it's like gut punch. Because the first time you hear your kid tell you, I hate you, or something like that, it's kind of hard to not turn around and go, what did I do to you? I've done everything. So,
It's
and I
so
think that's
hard.
important to understand.
It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah,
Because I
and
remember
you've
in the
walked that
beginning taking
path,
it personally. Yep.
yeah, but that's the key to it, right? Is not to take it personal. And I think one of the lessons that I learned after my son passed away, very very similar. When my son, he was 8 when he passed. I had to learn not to take life personal, right? And as I began to become a student in this world, of the student of grief and trauma, those things like that, I began to understand that life was very honest. It was neither fair nor unfair, but it was honest. It says, I'm
Yeah,
not going to guarantee you anything. I'm going to give
exactly.
you challenges. You may not like those challenges, but I need to see how you're going to show up. Either you're going to react or you're going to respond. And I think it's really easy for us to react um, to those challenges in life. And I think when we think about the reaction, there's the emotional attachment that comes along with that. In turn, it's really, really easy to take those things personal.
I
Mm.
agree. It really is. And
Now,
especially because, like you said, as parents, we almost look at it as our job to fix our child. We almost look at it, we have to fix everything with our child. That not that we have that power, but
mhm,
I think sometimes we think we do. And so we really take it all personally.
yeah, yeah, and and then we have the responsive side, which is I for me, um, is the more logical, rational thought that comes with it, with the understanding of being able to relinquish those hard moments, those challenging moments, and show up as a student. And then in turn, I can learn and I can take a deep breath, take a step back, look at it from the opposite end, and go, you know what? It's not personal. And
Right.
then I learned how to let those moments go, and in turn, I learned how to show up a little bit more joyful, a little bit more engaged with those individuals that needed me the most. Because as you mentioned before, you realize that it's not about you, right? It's
Right.
about the individual that you're in that space with. So then you learn how to visit and learn how to walk with them in a more effective way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so important. I mean, it helps. It really can be the turning point to turning around the relationship once you realize that.
Hmm. Now, before we wrap this thing up, um, how can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have, you can find me, I've got two websites actually. One is for my book, and that website is under my full name, debbiegalezane.com. And that one talks all about my book, which shares the journey of the love and loss of my son through his mental illness and addiction. And then I also have a website
Mhm.
for my coaching, which is at debbieGaleCoaching.com. And either of those websites, you can send me a message and it will go right to my email. You can also find me on Facebook under Debbie Gale or Debbie Gale Coaching, and Instagram and YouTube under Debbie Gale Coaching.
Nice. Now, I always ask the guest this: if you can leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
That life is precious and we never know how long we or anybody else has. And to be present and to be able to enjoy the moments with your child, with your children, and to let go of anger and frustration and resentment, and to really just open your heart to loving and being present with them.
Nice. Now, I want to let people know that you got something really big coming up, right?
I do.
Let's talk about your new podcast that you got coming on and what you're going to be telling stories about. And people, when you hear about it, if this is something that fits your narrative, please reach out to her. Let's get her a ton of guests, so to come out there and share these stories. Because the more we normalize the conversations behind these things, um, the more we can offer support and bring awareness to it. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be called Finding Peace Beyond the Pain. And it's going to be geared towards parents who have a child with mental illness and addiction, or parents who have lost a child. And I plan to have guests and speakers who will be able to shed light on some of the things that the parents are experiencing or going through, and giving them tips, giving them advice, giving them perspectives, like what to expect when your child is hospitalized or your child is going into treatment, how you can support them, how you can navigate your own grief if you've lost a child, or if you're just grieving the loss of your child who's still living, but the loss of how things were before their mental illness and addiction. So giving you some tips and advice of what you can do. I'll have guests on there that have gone through similar things to these, sharing their stories. And, just I'll also have, therapists, social workers, psychiatrists being able to talk about any of these things. And the nice thing about it's a internet TV platform, but it will be broadcast on all podcast platform as well. But if you watch it live, you will be able to actually call in and ask questions during the show. And so I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about being able to help more parents who are dealing with this. And I think sometimes it's not even just parents. It could be a caregiver, it could be another family member. But if you're going through something similar, I really think that my show is going to be really helpful. So I'm extremely excited.
I'm excited about that as well. Let me know so I can make sure that people know to tune in when you're going live, because I may be one of those guys that call in like, "Hey, what you up to?" But no,
Absolutely.
I think it'd be nice to.
I
Go
will
ahead.
be finding out. I will be finding out soon. It's going to be starting probably the third week in March, and it's either going to be Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern or Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm hoping for the Friday night slot, but I'll know next week. And that will, anybody who finds me on the social media or through my website, I'll be posting that information once I know the times and everything. But I'm definitely really excited about it.
Make sure you pass that information along to me. I would love to make sure that I can help get that out there so people can tune in and listen to those stories and get the help that they need, and find really, really good resources to help them as well. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. For everyone who's been tuning in, thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you guys taking took those things away from the conversation. And if it's your first time, and if you haven't already, do me a favor, head over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button if you think I'm worthy of that subscription. If not, that's fine. I just appreciate you guys tuning in and for the support that you guys give me. And if you do, please hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And if you know anyone that can benefit from these conversations that we have, please share this with them. I am Tony Lynch. This is going to conclude this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. Until next time, people, I appreciate you. Go check out Debbie. If you're struggling, please get the help and the support that you need. You don't have to walk through it alone. Until next time, peace.